to accept my friend Kapil's invitation to join me today for the inaugural Komireddy Jyothi Devi Memorial Lecture, an occasion that celebrates the life, legacy and enduring spirit of a remarkable woman. I'd like to begin by expressing my heartfelt gratitude to Sri Kapil Komireddy for inviting me to be part of this meaningful tribute. It's deeply humbling to stand here today, not merely to remember, but to contribute to carrying forward the values and ideals that Srimati Jyothi Devi embodied. Srimati Komireddy Jyothi Devi was a woman of courage, conviction, and quiet strength. A lawyer by qualification with an LLB degree, she chose a path that extended far beyond the walls of a courtroom. A path that led her into the heart of public life and service. Married to Sri Komireddy Ramulu, a senior Congress leader and former MLA from the Medpalli constituency, she shared not just a life with him, but a shared belief in public duty and social justice. Together they represented a generation of leaders who saw politics as a means to uplift, not to divide or diminish people. Her journey in public life began in 1995 when she was elected unanimously as the Mandal president of the Medpalli Mandal. From the very beginning, she earned the trust and affection of her community through her sincerity and accessibility. That spirit of service soon carried her to a larger stage. In 1998, when the Medpalli MLA seat fell vacant following the election of C.H. Vidyasagar Rao to Parliament, she stepped forward to contest the by-election and won, defeating her BJP opponent Venkatramana Reddy and becoming the only Congress candidate to win a seat in the multiple by-elections held that year in the state. Her time as an MLA, though lasting just under 2 years, left a mark far deeper than its duration might suggest. She earned a reputation as a formidable legislator, and her leadership was defined by compassion, integrity, and the belief that politics must always remain rooted in people's everyday struggles. Recognized for her dynamism and clarity of purpose, Srimati Komireddy Jyothi Devi was later appointed leader of the All India Women Legislators Forum, a position that allowed her to champion issues that extended far beyond her constituency. A doughty warrior for women's rights, she fought for 33% representation for women, well before it became my party's official stand or any party's official stand. She earned membership of the All India Congress Committee and served as General Secretary of the Andhra Pradesh Congress Committee. In a political landscape often dominated by men, she stood firm and fearless, inspiring a generation of women to step forward and claim their rightful place in public life. In her later years, even as she withdrew from the intensity of political contest, her commitment to service never waned. Those who knew her remember her warmth, her humility, and her steadfast belief in doing what was right, even when it was not easy. Her passing in November last year, November 2024, at the age of only 65, marked the conclusion of a remarkable life, but her presence continues to resonate in every life she touched and in every cause she fought for. As we gather here today to honor her memory, let this lecture not only be a remembrance, but a reaffirmation of her values, of her courage, and of her unshakable faith in public service. Srimati Komireddy Jyothi Devi's life reminds us that leadership is not measured in titles or terms, but in the quiet, lasting impact of one's actions. May her story continue to inspire all of us to serve with integrity, to lead with empathy, and to believe as she did that change begins with convictions. Srimati Komireddy Jyothi Devi's life, rooted in conviction and compassion, reminds us that public service is at its best when guided by values rather than expediency. It feels only fitting then that in her honor we reflect on the state of those very values that shape our collective political and moral imagination. For beyond the stories of individuals, the larger question remains: what kind of ideas will guide India's future? Today, as the national discourse grows increasingly shrill and polarized, there is little space left for serious engagement with political values. Amid the heat and dust and noise of electoral rhetoric, each party's insistence on loyalty to its leader rather than to a set of convictions, the very principles that undermine and underpin democracy, often fade from view. Yet India's political imagination has long been shaped by grand ideological convictions and currents: cultural nationalism, socialism, religious revivalism, even communism. And it's worth remembering that just over 3 decades ago, after the elections of 1991, India began a remarkable tryst with liberalism, an ideology that at the time seemed to mark, to quote Francis Fukuyama's now notorious 1989 essay, The End of History, the high point, it seemed, of humankind's political evolution and, his phrase, the final form of government. Yet in the years since, liberalism has faced challenges from both the left and the right, not only in India, but across the world. The rise of populist and authoritarian strongmen across the globe has seen the retreat of liberal democracy from its post-Cold War heyday to a far smaller club of nations today. The grand promise of liberal democracy, that freedom, prosperity, and the rule of law would together nurture societies of fairness and opportunity, is under strain. The phenomenon of democratic deconsolidation, a phrase invented by a couple of highly respected political scientists, has quickened across the world, and public trust in liberal institutions has declined. Surveys even suggest that even in India, support for authoritarian or military rule has outstripped confidence in representative democracy. Such trends are troubling, for they erode the very foundations on which our republic was built. Part of this crisis stems from the fact that liberalism today finds itself besieged from all sides. To many on the left, it represents an elitist creed, a doctrine that privileges markets over morality and individuals over communities, deepening inequality and alienating the marginalized. To the right, liberalism's emphasis on individual freedom is seen as corrosive to tradition and cultural identity, dismissed as a foreign Western import that lacks roots in Indian soil. The result is a dangerous narrowing of our intellectual space, where freedom itself becomes suspect and moderation is unfashionable. Misunderstood as Western, elitist, or synonymous with leftist activism, liberalism in India has struggled to assert itself as a coherent and indigenous tradition. Yet its principles, individual freedom, pluralism, constitutionalism, and moral reasoning, are not foreign imports. They are embedded in India's ancient intellectual soil, refracted through colonial encounters, and periodically revived in modern political experiments. To reclaim liberalism is not to mimic the West, but to rediscover a native grammar of freedom. So this may be precisely the moment to reclaim and reimagine Indian liberalism, to give it new life and purpose as a radical yet centrist ideology for our country. For as thinkers like Amartya Sen have reminded us, the essence of liberalism is not alien to India. Its emphasis on liberty, dignity, social justice, and harmony has deep civilizational roots. From Raja Ram Mohan Roy's reformist zeal to Rabindranath Tagore's prayer for freedom from insolent might, from Ranade and Gokhale's faith in reasoned progress to Ambedkar's constitutional vision of equality, the liberal impulse has long animated India's moral core. Thank you very much. Nor is it incompatible with Hindu values. Indeed, Hinduism's suitability for the modern world lies in its recognition of uncertainty and its pragmatic non-dogmatism, qualities that resonate deeply with the liberal spirit of questioning and tolerance. Even the radical critics of Phule and Ambedkar, demanding a more representative and egalitarian society, were grounded in the same pursuit of justice through better political instruments. Indian liberalism, after all, begins not in Locke or Mill, but in the Upanishads and the Buddhist Sanghas or councils, in the dialogues of the Mahabharata and the disputations of Nalanda. The tradition of Samvad, of reasoned debate, was central to Indian philosophical life. Thinkers across schools of thought, from Mimamsa to Charvaka, engaged in rigorous argumentation, often across metaphysical and ethical divides. The idea that truth emerges from dialogue, not dogma, that the very idea that came through Adi Shankara's debates throughout the country is foundational also to liberal thought. Ashoka's edicts, which call for respect across sex and the cultivation of moral virtue, reflect a liberal ethos of tolerance and ethical pluralism. This intellectual openness was not merely academic. It shaped governance. The Arthashastra, while pragmatic and realist, also emphasized rule of law and the accountability of kings. The concept of dharma was not a rigid code, but a contextual ethic, adaptable to circumstance and to reason. In short, ancient Indian thought offered a rich soil for liberal values, debate, diversity, and moral autonomy. But for liberalism to survive and to thrive in today's India, it must evolve. It must shed its aura of elitism and become a lived, inclusive conviction. A philosophy not just for the educated few, but for the many who seek fairness, dignity, and opportunity. This requires a more syncretic and democratized idea of liberalism, one that can absorb insights from both ends of the ideological spectrum without surrendering its essence. To do so, 4 transformations are needed. First, liberalism must engage sincerely with tradition and identity, the emotional and cultural forces that shape people's lives here in India. These cannot be dismissed as relics of the past. They must be understood, respected, and woven into a broader liberal narrative. Second, liberalism must redefine its relationship with the economy. A reformed liberalism must go beyond neoliberal orthodoxy to embrace both free enterprise and social justice, ensuring that the benefits of growth reach those still excluded from the marketplace. Third, it must revive faith in institutions and in representative politics, reversing the centralization of power and the erosion of trust that threatens democratic life. And finally, liberals themselves must find unity of purpose, recognizing that the threats to democracy are too grave to allow endless internal quarrels to dilute their collective strength. Liberalism at its core is sustained by respect for the Constitution and its institutions, and thereby for the rule of law, that quiet discipline which ensures that power remains answerable to, and not only that power remains answerable to the people, but that individual rights remain inviolable. Populism, by contrast, demands obedience to the collective will, and often claims to speak for their people against the law itself. But the rule of law is not the enemy of democracy, it is its custodian. It safeguards the weak from the strong. It protects minorities from majorities, and of course, citizens from the state. In that sense, the rule of law is a true expression of liberty, not a constraint on popular will, but its conscience. Indian liberalism today stands at a crossroads, but it also stands on firm historical ground. Its renewal will depend on whether we can once again make freedom meaningful, not only for the privileged, but for every citizen. The time to begin that renewal is now. If the liberal project in India must renew itself, it must do so not by retreating into elitism or into defensiveness, but by expanding its reach and relevance. The task before us is to make liberalism both vigorous and inclusive, to root it in India's social realities while retaining its universal ideals. It is in this spirit that I have spoken of what I call radical centrism. In recent years, the Indian political landscape has increasingly come to resemble a tug of war between two ideological extremes. On one side stands the new left, championed by thinkers like Yogendra Yadav, who argue for a politics rooted in the grievances of underprivileged castes and classes. On the other, the cultural nationalism of the right, articulated by voices like the RSS's Ram Madhav, which seeks to anchor India's identity in Hindutva values and civilizational pride. Both camps offer compelling counter-narratives, but is India condemned to oscillate between these two poles? Or is there space for a third liberal path between them, a radical centrism that draws from the strengths of both without succumbing to their excesses? Radical centrism is not a tepid compromise. It is a bold reimagining of Indian politics, one that embraces pluralism without erasing identity, that pursues growth without abandoning equity, that honors our civilization without resisting openness, and that seeks unity without enforcing uniformity. It is a politics that refuses to choose between Nehru and Patel, between Rajaji and Ambedkar, between the moral clarity of the left and the cultural confidence of the right. Instead, it seeks to synthesize their virtues into a coherent, future-facing vision. At the heart of radical centrism lies a commitment to Indian pluralism, not as a passive tolerance of difference, but as an active celebration of it. Nehru's vision of India as a secular, inclusive democracy remains foundational. But radical centrism must go further. It must recognize that pluralism is not merely about religion or language, it is about lived realities across caste, gender, region, and class. This means rejecting both the homogenizing impulse of cultural nationalism and the fragmenting impulse of identity politics. It means building coalitions that transcend narrow vote banks and speaking to a shared Indian destiny. It means affirming that a Dalit woman in Bihar and a tribal farmer in Chhattisgarh are not just symbols of marginalization, they are central to the Indian story. Radical centrism, in other words, must also reclaim nationalism from the clutches of exclusion. Sardar Patel's robust nationalism was rooted in pragmatism and unity, not in cultural supremacy. India needs a nationalism that binds rather than blinds, a patriotism that is confident but not chauvinistic. This nationalism, as I argued in my book, The Battle of Belonging, must be civic nationalism, not ethno-religious. It must honor the Constitution as the ultimate expression of Indian values. It must see dissent not as a betrayal, but as a sign of democratic health. And it must recognize that the idea of India is not static. It is a living, evolving conversation. Economic liberalism, as championed by C. Rajagopalachari or Rajaji and implemented by Dr. Manmohan Singh, has lifted millions out of poverty, but it has also deepened inequalities and alienated some swathes of the population. Radical centrism must embrace markets without worshipping them. As I once stated in Parliament, the magic of the market will not appeal to those who cannot afford to enter the marketplace. Radical centrism must therefore propose and pursue growth with a moral compass. This means investing in public goods, education, healthcare, infrastructure, while encouraging entrepreneurship and innovation through incentives to invest and by slashing regulatory red tape. It means reforming welfare to be targeted and efficient, not populist and wasteful. And it means recognizing that economic dignity is as vital as economic opportunity. In an era of polarization, consensus building is often dismissed as weakness. But Atal Bihari Vajpayee showed that consensus can be a source of strength. His ability to bring together diverse voices within his party and beyond was not just political skill, it was democratic wisdom. In our bitterly polarized politics, radical centrism must revive this spirit. It must prioritize dialogue over dogma, negotiation over noise. It must build institutions that are resilient and responsive. And it must recognize that governance is not a zero-sum game. It is a shared endeavor. Finally, radical centrism must place social justice at its core. Dr. Ambedkar's passionate advocacy for the rights of the oppressed was not a sectional demand. It was a universal call for dignity. His vision of constitutional morality must guide our politics. This means confronting caste discrimination, and not just in rhetoric but in policy. It means ensuring representation in institutions, access to opportunity, and protection under the law. It means recognizing that justice is not a favor, it is a foundational promise. What will the radical centrist agenda look like in practice? Well, the promotion of constitutional pluralism is fundamental. Defend secularism, federalism, and minority rights, while promoting cultural dialogue and mutual respect. Inclusive growth must follow. Combine market reforms with targeted social investment, especially in education, health, and digital infrastructure. Bat strongly for our civic nationalism. Promote a shared Indian identity rooted in constitutional values, not religious or ethnic exclusivity. But simultaneously stand for a robust defense and a vigorous foreign policy that effectively promotes Indian interests around the globe. Institutional reform is essential. Strengthen the independence and capacity of democratic institutions, from the judiciary to the election commission. 6. Encourage the free press and civil society to reflect the concerns of the Aam Aadmi, while at the same time serving as an essential safety valve for the political pressure cooker. For this, participatory governance is essential, is vital. Encourage citizen engagement, decentralization, and transparency in policy making. Now, this is not a utopian wish list. These 7 points are actually the set of convictions I have held since I came into politics, that I've articulated in political forums, declaimed from public platforms, and advocated in my writings. I believe it constitutes a pragmatic roadmap for a politics that is principled, that is inclusive, and that is future ready. India's political discourse has increasingly been trapped in a binary: left versus right, secularism versus nationalism, Hindutva versus minorities, redistribution versus growth. But this kind of binary is both reductive and corrosive. It forces citizens to choose sides when they would rather choose solutions. Radical centrism offers a way out. It invites us to imagine a politics that is not about balancing extremes, but about transcending those extremes. It asks us to be bold enough to borrow from Nehru's pluralism and Patel's pragmatism, from Rajaji's liberalism and Ambedkar's justice, from Vajpayee's consensus building and the citizens' aspirations. In doing so, it does not dilute conviction, it deepens it. It does not avoid conflict, it resolves it. And it does not seek power for its own sake, it seeks purpose. I've often been attacked for seeing merit in some positions of the other side. But for me, the only side I have been consistently on is India's. India is too complex. Thank you. India is too complex, too diverse, and too dynamic to be governed by ideological rigidity. Its challenges, job creation, digital transformation, social cohesion, internal security, climate change, require a politics that is agile, inclusive, and visionary. To me, radical centrism is not the middle of the road, it is the high road. It is not about splitting the difference, it's about redefining the difference. And it's not about avoiding extremes, it's about integrating their insights into a coherent whole. As India marches towards 2047, the centenary of our independence, let us ask, can we build a politics that reflects the best of our traditions and the boldest of our dreams? Can we move beyond the binary and embrace the possibility of the radical center? The answer perhaps lies not in choosing sides, but in choosing India. If the essence of centrism is balance guided by moral clarity, then one of its most vivid applications lies in how societies navigate their economic choices. The debate between capitalism and socialism is often framed as a contest of absolutes. Yet in truth, it is a test of nuance. It challenges us to ask how prosperity can coexist with fairness, how growth can serve both enterprise and equity. Around the world, these questions have acquired renewed urgency. In the United States, faith in capitalism has declined to historic lows, especially amongst younger generations who see a system that rewards the few over the many. This is apparent in the socialist Zohran Mamdani's victory in the New York mayoral race. What his supporters express is not nostalgia for central planning, but frustration at inequality, exclusion, and the anxiety of living without safety nets. Their unease finds echoes across continents, including in India. Our own economic journey began in the decades after independence with an experiment in democratic socialism, not out of ideology but out of necessity. The state took the lead in development, building institutions and industries where the private sector was still nascent. Over time, however, inefficiency, protectionism, and fiscal strain forced India to liberalize in 1991. The opening of markets unlocked a wave of growth and opportunity. Capitalism, once viewed with suspicion, became the new national confidence. Yet 3 decades later, the mood has shifted again. Inequality has widened, social mobility has slowed, and many feel the ladder of progress has been pulled up. The promise of liberalization was prosperity for all, but for far too many that promise remains deferred. The disquiet is not anti-growth, it is anti-exclusion. It is a call for an economy that works for more than just its winners. India today is neither purely capitalist nor purely socialist. It's a blend. It's a system of private innovation sustained by public protection. Our stock market boom coexists with food subsidies. We celebrate unicorns, yet depend on employment guarantees like Manrega, to keep millions afloat. This coexistence is not confusion. It is pragmatism. It reflects a recognition that efficiency and empathy are not opposites but complements. When young people question capitalism, they're not rejecting ambition. They're asking whether ambition can coexist with dignity. When citizens call for stronger welfare programs, They're not asking for dependency, but for fairness. A centrist vision must therefore see markets not as moral arbiters, but as instruments, powerful but not infallible. The societies that endure in the modern world are those that learn this lesson. The welfare states, the post-war Europe, emerged from capitalist economies that realized survival demanded compassion. In India, too, our most successful policies have come from a willingness to blend ideals, growth with justice, openness with protection, and reform with restraint. That ultimately is the centrist understanding, that ideological purity is the enemy of progress. The real challenge is not to choose between capitalism and socialism, but to design systems that are humane as well as productive, and just as well as dynamic. In a world divided by slogans, centrism dares to be subtle, and that may be its greatest weakness sometimes and its greatest strength in reality. In the end, what we have been discussing is not a mere set of political ideas or intellectual fashions. It is in truth a way of seeing a moral temperament as much as a political philosophy. Liberalism, centrism, pluralism are not relics of a bygone age. They are the lifeblood of any society that wishes to remain both free and fair, both ambitious and humane. The challenge, of course, lies in sustaining this balance in an age that rewards outrage more than understanding. It is far easier to take sides than to take stock. It's far easier to inflame than to illuminate. But leadership, as Joti Deviji's life reminds us, is not about choosing the loudest side. It is about listening for the wiser voice, even if it is a quieter voice. She taught us that conviction and compassion are not opposites, that firmness need not preclude kindness, that tradition and progress can in fact walk hand in hand. In many ways, that is also the lesson of our republic. India's founding visionaries understood that democracy is not a destination, but a discipline, one that must be practiced daily in our institutions and in our instincts. It asks of us both idealism and restraint, both passion and patience. When these go out of balance, our discourse shrinks into slogans. When they work together, our democracy sings. Yet if democracy and liberalism are to remain living force in India, it must be anchored not only in ideas but in ethics. The Indian tradition is long understood through the concept of dharma, that which upholds the moral order of the world. Dharma reminds us that freedom without responsibility is hollow, that rights must be matched by duty, and that compassion must temper conviction. It is not a rigid code, but a living principle that adapts to time and context, urging us to act with integrity, balance, and empathy. In a sense, this moral equilibrium between duty and freedom, conviction and compassion, is what sustains both a good life and a good society. Srimati Jyothi Devi's life reflected precisely this equilibrium. She led with courage but never without kindness. She had held convictions but never without compassion. Her example reminds us that political philosophy must always be grounded in moral clarity, that public service at its best is dharma in action. Today, as polarization deepens across the world, and indeed within our own borders, the need for a vigorous and inclusive center has never been greater. Not a timid middle that splits the difference, but a courageous one that holds the differences together. A centrism that knows when to stand its ground and when to reach across, that believes the future is built not by demolishing the other side, but by understanding the other side. For India, this balance has always been our secret strength. We have lived for millennia amid the multiplicity of faiths, languages, philosophies, castes, creeds, color, culture, consonants, costumes, customs, and cuisines, and yet we have managed to weave them all into a single civilizational fabric. Our challenge now is to renew that pluralism for a new century, to ensure that our economic reforms are matched by social inclusion, that our global ambitions are anchored in moral purpose, that our politics speaks not only to identity, but to imagination. That ultimately is the promise of a centrist vision, that we can reconcile the old and the new, the market and the state, the self and the society. It does not ask us to abandon conviction. It asks us to enrich it with empathy. It does not demand that we be neutral. It asks that we be nuanced. It reminds us that wisdom lies often not in the extremes, but at the intersections. If we can nurture that spirit in our policies, in our politics, and in ourselves, then perhaps we can build a nation that truly reflects the best of who we are, confident yet compassionate, rooted yet restless, proud yet plural. That would be the truest tribute to the legacy we celebrate today. For Joti Devi's life was not defined by the position she held, but by the principles she upheld. A belief that leadership is service, that politics is possibility, that the purpose of power is not to divide, but to deliver. As we look ahead to the India of 2047 and beyond, let us remember that the true test of our democracy will not be how loudly its extremes shout, but how steadily its center holds. Let us have the courage to build bridges when others build walls, to speak with reason when others shout with rage, to keep faith in the enduring wisdom of moderation in an age that is immoderate. For in the end, the future of this Republic of India will not be written by those who choose sides. It will be shaped by those who choose India. That, my friends, is the India we must keep believing in, keep building, and stay worthy of. Thank you for listening to me, and Jai Hind.